Hello there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Myro, and today I'm going to talk about 15 albums that shaped my taste in music. And yes, this is not going to be a rankings video of sorts, so I'm not going to rank any of these albums. It is going to be a chronological list of albums that I feel influenced and shaped my taste in music over the years. And I'm going to start with what I think was the first actual album that kind of propelled me into different genres of music and in music in general. So I'm going to go over them one by one. And I decided with 15. There are bunch other albums, of course, but these 15 are kind of a staple, you can say. And I listened to these albums a lot over the years. To tell you the truth, some of these albums are not even my favorite albums by the band or the artist in question, but I still do find them quite important part in my musical journey over the years. So I'm going to talk a bit about each of these records. I have my CDs ready here and a single vinyl. I'm still, new into vinyl games because everything is expensive as shit. But my music journey started with an album that I already talked about. And before I start, I'm just gonna let you know this is not gonna be a in-depth review of any of these records because I talked about some of these and some of them I'm going to talk about in some future videos. Actually, all began around 2000 and 2001. I was listening to, the usual stuff, MTV, VH1, watching music videos, and I actually bought even a CD around that time. I bought in 2001. It was my first CD, Fever by Kylie Minogue, and I really like that album. I actually never listened to it in full, front to back in the day. I listened to songs I loved, and the rest it was a skip to me. I do like that album, but it wasn't the first proper album that I loved. It was this album, Coldplay Parachutes from 2000. Yeah, the dreaded Coldplay. I already talked about them in a separate video, so if you haven't watched that, please do check it out. And I was like around 10, 11 when I first heard this record, so it was around that time, 2000, 2001. I saw actually a music video for Don't Panic and Yellow, and I was kind of curious. I really loved Don't Panic, especially. I loved the aesthetics of that music video and the song unique sound, and I wanted to explore more. So I got this album, and I was blown away. I was really blown away. I listened to this album constantly. It's a rather short record, and you know, it was on repeat constantly. This was the only thing I listened to it back in the day, and what I love about this album, even back then, it was how unique it sounded. It was a more subdued album compared, for example, to their next release, Rush of Blood to the Head, which was more grandiose and bombastic, what have you. This one is mostly acoustic guitars and piano, and it has a really nice vibe to it, atmosphere that was really elevated even further by Chris Martin vocal performance, which was amazing, especially on song Shiver. And if I would highlight three songs from this album that I really love, it will be Don't Panic, Spice, and High Speed. This album opened my eyes and ears to a lot of different bands around that time, Radiohead included, even though this album doesn't sound like Radiohead at all, except maybe High Speed, but everything else is more like Jeff Buckley, which I already talked about in my Coldplay video. But yeah, it opened my eyes to a lot of different things, and one thing led to another, and I got to listen to The Cure shortly after. I knew of Friday I'm in Love and Boys Don't Cry and Just Like Heaven because those songs were on repeat on VH1 especially. And it wasn't until I saw the video for Lullaby that I was enthralled and curious to hear more. So since Lullaby was the single from Disintegration, I decided to give it a go, and here we are. My go-to album for winter playlist. This was a staple, winter staple. Every time winter comes, this is the album I actually listen to the most. It was on repeat constantly, and I guess my love for moodier and more atmospheric music comes from this record in particular. Uh, it is an album that really pulls you in with its brooding and dark atmosphere, lush synths, melodic bass that really adds to the overall ethereal sound of the record. This album is pure emotion and raw emotion and classic for a reason. I love every single song of it, and it really opened my eyes to now a different kind of style of music, which is more gothic rock and more darker, um, more melancholic kind of music. I already talked about it in length on my The Cure video, so you can check that one as well. And album highlights for me are Lullaby, Fascination Street, and the title track Disintegration. This next artist I haven't mentioned on the channel at all, I think, and it is my favorite musician and my favorite artist of all time, and it's David Bowie. And the first album I ever heard by Bowie was Heroes from 1977. It was introduced to me by an older friend who thought I would like it, and he was goddamn right. I did love this album. And my Bowie journey started with Heroes and its magnificent title track. And like Low, this album is divided. Side one, including more traditional sounding songs, but this time around, I feel the songs are even more intricate and more layered, especially the lyrics, which are some of his best ever, like on songs Sons of the Silent Age, Heroes, or Joe the Lion. I just adore the title track. It was the first Bowie track I ever heard, and it still amazes me how masterfully it was produced by Tony Visconti and Brian Eno. Bowie's amazing and emotional vocal performance is still one of my favorites ever. And unlike the first side of Low, songs on the first side of Hero sound way more fleshed out and layered. After all, Robert Fripp was playing guitar on some of these songs, and it's quite noticeable, especially on Heroes. And Blackout, for example, is one of the most deranged vocal performances by Bowie. And as is the case with Low, Side 2 is more experimental, more ambient kind of tracks, but to my taste, even better than on Low. Side 2 kicks off with V2 Schneider, that it can be compared in a way to A New Career in a New Town from Low. And from there we get three even more moodier and gloomier and darker tracks in Sense of Doubt, Moss Garden, and Hellish and Dark, Neukölln, or however you pronounce it. And to everyone's surprise, it ends up with a more funkier track, The Secret Life of Arabia, a complete change from the previous three songs, and to me it closes the album perfectly. To me, Heroes refined the sound of Low and made it even better. Truly a masterpiece and an album that really got me into a more experimental and more ambient music down the line. And it actually introduced me to Bowie, so it was an important album to me in a lot of different ways. And three songs I would like to highlight from this record would be the title track, obviously, Neukölln, and Secret Life of Arabia. I don't know, this album means a lot to me, and I'm glad that my friend introduced me to Bowie through this record, especially. I still love it. And when I do my Bowie ranking video, hopefully soon enough, you'll see where this album lands for me. Next one, I have an album that kind of was my introduction to prog music, and that is Animals by Pink Floyd. And this album is not an album you can get into easily, as for example Dark Side of the Moon or even Wish You Were Here. It is much more darker record than the previous two. Album was based on George Orwell's Animal Farm, and to me, this album contains Roger Waters' best lyrics. Everything sounds bleak, hopeless, and desolate. The songs are long, but they pack a punch. I think this is Roger's best work, but still some of the best guitar work by David Gilmour. Even though the band started to crack and the divide between Waters and the rest of the band was becoming apparent, they still managed to produce and write this timeless classic. The production is marvelous, and as it was on the previous two, but unlike more sterile sound of Wish You Were Here, this album sounded even more grimier, which fits the overall tone perfectly. Basically, this album introduced me to Pink Floyd, to progressive rock, to concept albums, and down the line, it introduced me to a bunch of other different bands of progressive rock and later progressive metal as well. And talking about metal, this next album is my introduction to heavy metal music and my first proper metal band that I loved and cared about was, of course, Iron Maiden. And even though it wasn't the first album I heard by the band, I've listened to the Number of the Beast previously, it was actually Seventh Son of a Seventh Son that really made an impact on me and made me love this band. The first and only semi-concept record by the band, leaning even more towards progressive sound, which I loved, and to tell you the truth, maybe even their catchiest record. It's full of memorable guitar leads and choruses. The story is partially inspired by a novel Seventh Son by Orson Scott Card, but it evolved into its own thing. It's not a full-blown concept, mind you, but it feels like it. It sounds like it. It opens up with iconic and atmospheric intro of Moonchild, one of the most underrated Maiden tracks, and fantastic opener that sets the mood for the rest of the record perfectly. And it goes to a more multi-layered and more progressive metal sounding song of Infinite Dreams. Can I Play It With Madness is catchy as hell, and it's short and simple, perfect song for a single. It was peak Iron Maiden and their last fantastic record. I I was a big fan of Iron Maiden, and actually it was the first live show, well, the first concert that I actually ever went in 2007, I think. Yes, in 2007. I was watching Rock in Rio, for example, their live album back in the day a lot, and I was hoping, oh God, I would like to see them live, and it kind of happened. I was 16, 17, actually 17 in 2007, and I was blown away. And this was always my kind of a top tier Iron Maiden record. The album that helped me a lot to get into metal and Maiden in particular, and I'm planning to do as well Iron Maiden discography ranking soon enough. But I don't know where this album lands now. I have to listen to them all again and see where it fits. But yeah, this album was my introduction to metal. This next one I really adore, no pun intended. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness by the Smashing Pumpkins, commercial peak for the band, and an album that made me love long ass albums, basically. If the album is dynamic and varied, it can be even 3 hours, I wouldn't mind. This album is 2 hours long, 28 songs, but it just works, man, and I love it. This album constantly goes back and forth. At one point, it is really intense, like on songs I Know 201, XYU, or Tales of Scorched Earth, and the next thing you know, we got to beautiful and more mellow songs like Lily, Cupid the Luck, or 1979. But what makes this album work is exactly that variety and shifts and turns happening on every step. An emotional roller coaster with a wild range of dynamics happening here. When I first heard this record, it didn't take long for me to appreciate it. It's filled with interesting guitar passages, orchestral arrangements, like on beautiful and uplifting classic Tonight Tonight. The album is split in two CDs. We have Dawn to Dusk and Twilight to Starlight, both containing 14 tracks. And yes, the first CD, when you look, is filled and packed with classics. And I know that many people tend to kind of, not too keen on the second CD, Twilight to Starlight, saying that it's inconsistent. But to tell you the truth, I find it also quite interesting and entertaining as the first half. Really important album for me, and an album that opened my eyes to some other bands of that era. For example, Caius and their album Welcome to the Sky Valley as well. I mean, they're not similar to Smashing Pumpkins, but you know how it goes. One thing leads to another, so I went ahead and listened to Caius as well, and that led me to Tool. So yeah, great album and really important album for me. Three tracks I have to pick and choose for this one and highlight would be Tonight Tonight, XYU, and Porcelina of the Vast Oceans. Okay, this next one is a big one. Big one for me and my favorite metal album of all time, and an album that made me love this band a lot and made it my favorite band in high school, and that is this bad boy from 1990, Megadeth Rust in Peace. Even though it wasn't the first Megadeth record I heard, it wasn't until I heard Atul Amon from Euthanasia that made me kind of, "Oh, okay, let's check this out." And Euthanasia was my first Megadeth record that I've listened to, but this one I feel is much more impactful, and the album that actually helped shape my uh, taste in metal music. It was the one that made me love even more complex sounding metal music. The album is pure technical masterclass. It combines elements of classic thrash metal, heavy metal, uh, technicality and melodic hooks are, you know, cranked to 11 here. The songs are crafted with care, and every song second of this record to me is pure bliss. Out of all thrash metal albums released by the so-called Big Four, I find this album the only one to stand the test of time, a groundbreaking endeavor that inspired many other metal bands. Dual guitar combo of Dave Mustaine and Marty Friedman on this album is magical. Blistering solo dueling on Hangar 18 is one of a kind, and I have to mention that every band member here plays like there's no tomorrow. David Ellefson on bass and Nick Menza's intense drumming. What made me love this album is its complexion, technicality, and how textured the guitar work is. Just listen to, for example, Five Magics. Even the lyrics are also really good here. Maybe the best lyrical work by Mustaine. A true classic that inspired me to dabble even more with more extreme kind of metal music. Songs that I would like to pick from this record are Holy Wars, The Punishment Due, Hangar 18, and Tornado of Souls. Okay, these next two albums, actually next couple of records, kind of follow a pattern that started with Disintegration by The Cure, and I started to appreciate more kind of darker, more gothic kind of sound. And the album and the band that kind of helped me in that journey was the Sisters of Mercy and their record Floodland, a band that released only a handful of albums, but this one got me into a more gothic sound. They started the second wave of gothic rock and kind of a dark wave, and this album especially is their peak. Andrew Eldridge, the leader of the band, really wrote some of the most catchiest gothic tunes of the 80s. Just listen to the opening track, Dominion, Mother Russia, or Lucretia, My Reflection, one of the most well-known songs of the album. Drum machine, synths, pounding bass makes this album slap really hard. Even songs like Discorrosion, that's almost 10 minutes of repeating the same line over and over again, and with a bit of this hint of 80s cheese, it really works. It's a great track, and Andrew really sells it. My only complaint that I had even back then was the length of some of these songs, Discorrosion including. They could be trimmed down a bit, but nonetheless, this album that got me into gothic rock and metal, and it actually led me to my next pick here, which is Typo Negative, October Rust, another 90s record, a band that combines the elements of gothic music, synths, heavy doomy riffs inspired by Black Sabbath, and Peter Steele mesmerizing vocals. that fits the music perfectly. That whole gothic aesthetics, romanticism, sexuality, and sadness is done marvelously here. Love You to Death is a beautiful love song. There are even some mystical tracks here, like Lush, Green Man, but also sad and melancholic songs like Red Water, Christmas Morning, or upbeat, funny, and catchy as hell, My Girlfriend's Girlfriend. This album has it all, but it's all nicely packed into this gothic, gloomy aesthetic that I started to appreciate even more. This album also helped a lot. I kind of got into my next two picks that are even more heavier and more metal than Typo Negative. The next one is Draconian Times by Paradise Lost, British band, British doom gothic metal band. And as I got deeper into metal, and more specifically doom gothic metal, I stumbled upon Paradise Lost and their 1995 masterpiece Draconian Times. A band that started as a doom death metal act, they slowly shifted away from it towards more commercial sound, more elegant gothic sound on Icon, an album that I really love, but not as much as the next full-length album, Draconian Times from 1995. They refined the sound from Icon and make it even more gothic metal this time around without growls by Nick Holmes. It is all clean singing here. Songs are drenched in melancholy and sadness, but at the same time quite catchy and more radio friendly than before, as apparent on tracks like Hallowed Land with its melodic and intricate guitar work by Greg McIntosh, and the single The Last Time that kind of propelled the band out of that extreme metal roots to a more commercial, more accessible sound, and that's how I got into them. This album is an album I return to often to this day, and an album that got me into this subgenre of metal music, and it kind of led me to more extreme genres of metal, like death metal, for example, bands like uh, Dark Tranquillity or In Flames. Songs I would like to highlight from Draconian Times would be Hallowed Land, Enchantment, and Forever Failure. And it kind of got me into this band as well, Tiamat, and their album 1990, from 1994, Wild Honey. So basically, Paradise Lost and a video game called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines inspired me to listen to this album and to this band. And it was an album that combines, and it is an album that combines gothic doom metal with psychedelic and progressive elements of Pink Floyd. It was a win-win combination for me, so it was a natural progression. It is a beautiful and moody record drenched in mysticism. We have everything here. More heavier tracks like Whatever That Hurts and The R, to more prophetic and lush songs like Gaia and Visionaire, to a more acoustic and dynamic numbers of Do You Dream of Me and Pocket Sized Sun. This album feels like looking through a kaleidoscope. It's just beautiful, and it really got me into this whole dark, moody side of things as well in metal. Songs I would like to highlight from this album would be DR, Visionaire, and Gaia. Around 2004, I kind of started to dabble with a even more darker music, and the band and the album I'm going to talk about next is Opeth and their 2003 record, Damnation. I wasn't into death metal growls or black metal around that time, but I was definitely into this album. It was introduced once again by my friend who thought I would like it, and sure, I did like this one. I remember listening to this album constantly for almost 2 years before I started to listen to other albums by Opeth. Um, it was around early 2004 when I started listening to Opeth and this album in particular, and I was blown away. It This album really spoke to me, and I remember walking around town with my headphones on, listening to this melancholic masterpiece of an album. I didn't even know of the band prior to this record. It was my introduction to the band, and it took me some time to get into death metal. I've listened only to Damnation, like I said, for almost 2 years before listening to anything else by them. Mikael Åkerfeldt, the leader of the band, managed to make a more popular record with some catchy choruses, like on songs To Rid of the Disease, for example. The overall vibe of this record is moody but addictive at the same time. Just listen to the opening track and opening notes of Window Pane. The flow is great, apart maybe from the closing track, Weakness, which isn't fitting as the closing track since the previous song, rightfully titled Ending Credits, sounds like a proper closer, but anyway, I digress. The production is top notch thanks to Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree, and this album was not only an album that introduced me to Opeth and that whole genre of progressive metal, progressive death metal, it introduced me to Steven Wilson and Porcupine Tree as well, who at the time just released In Absentia. And this album really means a lot to me, and I still listen to it to this day. Songs I would like to highlight from Damnation would be Window Pane, In My Time of Need, and Closure. And I have three more albums to show you. And this next one is an album that and an artist that was introduced to me by my wife. And this is PJ Harvey, To Bring You My Love. I knew of PJ Harvey through Nick Cave, but I never actually listened to a full PJ Harvey album. I knew a couple of songs only. And my wife introduced me to Polygene, and yes, this album in particular was mind blowing to me. I really like her voice, I like her energy on this record, especially on songs like Send His Love to Me, on which she sounds broken and emotional. This album is honest, it is emotional, and it made me feel similar to how I felt when I've listened to, for example, The Cure's Disintegration. And that's why I like it actually. It is pure, raw emotion and intensity, and that is something I always look for in music. And to me, this album is just that. Songs I would like to highlight from this record would be To Bring You My Love, The Dancer, and Down by the Water. Then I have another album that was introduced to me by my wife, so thank you very much for that once again. And this is Kate Bush, Hounds of Love from 1985. And what I like about this album the most, beside her gorgeous voice, is how varied this album is. Once again, we have two sides, more popular and accessible sound of Hounds of Love, the first part, and we have more experimental sound of the ninth wave. The diversity here is impressive, and I like both sides almost equally, with Cloudbusting being one of my favorite pop songs of the 80s. But the second half of the record, the ninth wave, is where I fell in love with Kate Bush, the more weirder, more experimental side of the record, with almost frantic songs of Waking the Witch and ever so disturbing Under Ice, a song that make you feel like you're trapped beneath the ice. We even have a traditional Irish folk song in Jig of Life and more atmospheric song like Hello Earth and optimistic closer The Morning Fog. This album has it all and has all I like about music, the variety, the intensity, the beauty, and to a certain level sense of unease. Songs I would like to highlight from this record are Cloudbusting, Under Ice, and Running Up the Hill. In the end, when I look all of these 15 records, 14 records actually, it all led to this album in a way because it's kind of a latest edition and an album and an artist that I got introduced to in around 2010s, and I covered them already. It was my first video for this channel, and it is Swans. Yeah, I'm talking about Swans again. I already mentioned that my first ever Swans record I heard was White Light from the Mouth of Infinity. But it wasn't until I heard The Great Annihilator that made me fall in love with the band and their sound. It has everything that I loved about music, and this album is, in a way, a combination of everything they've done up to that point. So we have more industrial kind of sound from their 80s, more folkier sound from early 90s and late 80s, and even some more experimental stuff that started to appear on Love of Life and will further being developed on the next album, Soundtracks for the Blind, and especially in 2010s with the trilogy of albums. But this album was my introduction, proper introduction to the band. This is the album that really uh, got me into the band and this style of music, which isn't for everyone. I must admit it's not for everyone, but this album is pretty accessible even to people who do not like this kind of music. I think it is an important part of my musical journey. Their music is really impressive and really captivating, especially their trilogy of albums from 2010s. But I already talked about The Great Annihilator on my review, so you can check that one out. And a couple of tracks I would like to highlight here are I Am the Sun, Celebrity Lifestyle, and Mind, Body, Light, and Sound. Yeah, so this is it. These are the 15 albums. It all started with Coldplay and it ended with Swans, which is quite interesting musical journey in my opinion. Of course, I'll listen to a bunch of other stuff, but for the most part, these are the albums that left a mark on my um, musical journey over the years. So, yeah, I hope you found this to be interesting as it was to me. And thank you for watching. And share, subscribe, like all of that good YouTube jazz. And we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.